OpticsPlanet is the largest online retailer in the shooting, hunting, military, tactical, and outdoor space.
What are some of those early career lessons that stuck with you?
It's very important to be an empathetic leader and to be understanding. Business is one thing, of course, but people are always the most important part of any business.
You guys have, I think, tens of thousands of SKUs. You can keep me honest.
All of that, we're over 1 million.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Over 1 million SKUs.
The biggest lesson I would say is that you have to have good data. Not only good data, but accessible data. The customer has an Amazon mindset. They expect things to be there in 2 days. Challenge is that a lot of consumers don't realize that they're already paying for those services.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Shipped. Today I'm speaking with Alex Royzen, who is the Chief Supply Chain Officer at OpticsPlanet. Alex, thanks for chatting with me today.
Thank you for having me, Sean. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, no, as am I. There's a lot that I want to dive into with your background to begin, but maybe just for the audience that's not familiar with OpticsPlanet, you could give us just a quick run by of what you guys do.
Yeah, absolutely. So OpticsPlanet is the largest online retailer in the shooting, hunting, military, tactical, and outdoor space. So think of it as like a Bass Pro Shops, Cabela's, online only. It's been around for 25 years now. This is our 25th anniversary. In fact, we're about a week away from our 25th anniversary holiday gala, which is very exciting. And it's a technology company. It's an e-commerce company. It's a very interesting place to work. It's almost as if Google and Bass Pro had a baby, is the way that I always describe it.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. I know that I ordered something on OpticsPlanet probably for the first time. It had to have been probably 15 years ago. So I think you guys have certainly been a category definer and leader in the space. But I want to talk a little bit about you because you've been there probably since the first time I made that initial order, actually. You started, I believe, as a merchandising specialist and have worked your way up to the C-suite. Would love to just hear a little bit more about what that journey was like and maybe even starting at kind of the beginning.
Absolutely. So when I graduated from college, I went to a very small school, a liberal arts school in Wisconsin called Ripon College. Less than 1,000 students, absolutely tiny. And my first job out of college was actually at a mining equipment manufacturer. Not something I absolutely planned on doing, but when you're graduating college and looking for a way to make money and a place to live, that one kind of fell into my lap through a couple of connections. Stayed there for about a year. This was on the south side of Milwaukee, and I realized I really wanted to come home to Chicago, which is where I'm originally from. Met a few people, and a friend of a friend spoke very highly of this company. It was a smaller e-commerce company, but that was growing very rapidly, and they were looking for good people. Had no idea what they sold, had no idea what they did or how they did it. This was back in 2009, of course. And since then, since joining the company, you're absolutely right. I started out as technically a junior merchandising specialist, which is even the lowest rung on the totem pole, you could say. I have slowly over 16 and a half years zigzagged my way up that corporate ladder. And a lot of it was being in the right place at the right time and reaching for opportunities. And that's really a big piece of the advice that I give to anybody is that if you come into a company at the right time or you put yourself out there and you volunteer for different projects or new initiatives, things like that, you give yourself the opportunity for visibility and the ability to rise up through the ranks in an organization and prove your proficiency.
And so, Alex, one of the things maybe that would be beneficial for our audience as well is just what are some of those early career lessons that stuck with you and still influence how you lead today?
Absolutely. I feel like one of the biggest career lessons that I've learned, and I learned this from my boss, who at this point is the president of the company, and I also report to the CEO of the company, is it's very important to be an empathetic leader and to be understanding. Business is one thing, of course, but people are always the most important part of any business. And I remember when I first started, it didn't matter that I was a junior merchandising specialist. The CEO would walk over and talk to me and ask me my opinion on things. We have a culture. It's not that we had, it's a culture that actually hasn't changed, even though the company has grown so dramatically. We have a culture of honesty and openness and helpfulness. And so anybody can suggest an improvement. Anyone can come up with an idea that's going to end up being taken seriously and seriously evaluated, which is really important. And seeing that type of respect at all different levels of the business really helped craft who I feel like I am as a leader today in terms of how I respect the people below me and also the people that I work with in other departments. The other thing that I would say is that generally being a helpful person, and that's part of the culture at the company that I work at, is extremely important. Everyone's striving towards the same goal. And so if you need help or you need advice, even if it's outside of your standard swim lane, you have resources that you can go to, and they're not going to attack you for asking a question about how their process works or how things interrelate to each other.
That's great. I feel like that's one thing in supply chain that I feel like is unique in the sense that everybody's willing to help, and I think sometimes there's the stigma of like, maybe the industry that's done things for 20 years and might be a little bit more kind of prickly on the outside, but truly I feel the same sentiment that if you kind of ask for help, you get it and you get the guidance. One thing I want to talk about is the complexity of the business that you run. You guys have, I think, tens of thousands of SKUs. You can keep me honest there.
All of that, we're over 1 million.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Over 1 million SKUs.
Yeah.
What, I mean, there's so many questions I have, but as far as, more than 1 million SKUs is sounds kind of like a logistical nightmare.
Well, it can be.
What's the biggest lesson that you've learned about managing inventory and the complexity at scale?
So the biggest lesson I would say is that you have to have good data, and you have to have not only good data, but accessible data and a way to reliably interpret that data. You can't, I mean, you look at a company like Amazon, we often get compared to the Amazon of this space because Amazon doesn't really operate in firearm parts or accessories, for example. They sell optics, which is also a huge category for us, but they don't sell firearm parts and accessories. So in the shooting, hunting, and outdoor world, we are the Amazon of that world, even though we're not a marketplace. Data is by far the most important thing. When I started working at this company, I had zero experience in the lifestyles that we are servicing. And obviously that's changed dramatically over time as I've become more ingrained in the industry. But at the time, the prevailing mentality was our data is so good that whether we're selling a pair of socks or a red dot site, it doesn't matter. A widget is a widget. Data is data. The price is the price. The demand is this type of demand. Forecasts look like this. It doesn't matter what it is from that standpoint, from an inventory management standpoint. With 1 million SKUs, as you can imagine, there's a ton of different challenges there. Different levels of sales per SKU. Some things are there for a given purpose, like search engine optimization, while others are actually there for the purpose of selling. So having that mix and variety of purpose in the products that we sell is extremely challenging. I say that lightly, challenging. I have to pause before I say that because it is very challenging. But the data systems that we've built and the tools and the reports and the forecasts and all of these other things and the way that all the different teams work together make it fairly seamless.
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine. And I think so much has changed now where the data is becoming easier and easier to query and
Mm.
manipulate. And there's a lot more that we'll talk about from a technology perspective. But I think there's still the possibility that things just go wrong,
Oh,
even
always.
data, right?
Always, always, always. Listen, data is great. Don't get me wrong. I love data. Everybody who works at this company loves data. Our unofficial motto is that for everything we do, we need to measure, then we analyze, and then we act. And that is written on the walls in our building. Measure, analyze, act. Because again, data is such a key component of everything that we end up doing. But yes, it can absolutely go wrong. And it kind of leads into, AI and where things are going from that standpoint. I was listening to a story recently that talked about how there's a very big divide between senior leadership at companies and data leaders at companies, and how senior leaders believe AI will solve all their problems, and data leaders realize that their data is not capable of feeding AI properly. The positive of the company that I work at is that our senior leaders are also data leaders. So from an AI implementation or anything else, even without the phrase AI, a lot of the things that we've been doing have been, in a way, artificial intelligence over time as early adopters.
Yeah. So it's a good segue. I was going to ask you about some of the data adoption, but I'll
Sure.
come back to that because I think it's a great segue into the topic of AI. And I couldn't agree more. Obviously, number one, AI is not a magic box, and it has to have quality data or quality process to work off of. So I think it's great that your leadership is aligned to make sure that the expectations are kind of
Sure.
set. What are you guys doing around AI? Is it more internal? Are you guys bringing in third parties, or can you just talk about what that looks like?
Absolutely. So one of the joys of working in a company that has a significant technology division is that we do a lot of things ourselves. We actually have an AI team that has been built internally that is, I guess you could say, skunkworks for a ton of different things. And it's everything from how our website is merchandised to what our potential new forecasting system looks at and what kind of variables it's able to take in and the speed at which it's able to predict certain things. So, obviously I can't talk about too many things internally, but the test systems that we've come up with in AI have shown incredible results when you run what they would have done against historical data. So things like, every company wants to maximize their inventory turns, right? Uh, these models allow you to carry less inventory, but generate more sales because of the proper inventory that you're carrying, right? As an example, from an inventory management standpoint, from a merchandising standpoint, it's another great one where you have so much data, again, historical data of what products customers are buying, what are complementary products, what are competitive products against each other, price points, things like that. And if you can merchandise your website a certain way, and it's the same thing that brick and mortar stores and e-commerce retailers have been doing for years, you're going to generate incremental sales. And that's really the goal for everyone.
Totally. And I think probably to that same extent, there's various subcategories I see both on the internal AI initiatives and when there are third parties engaged, where there's categories that works better than it does on others. And I'm sure you guys are seeing that as well.
For sure.
Maybe from a high level, certainly without giving away too much. Are there categories or maybe business units that you see stronger success with than others as it relates to kind of some of the efforts, or is it fairly consistent across the board?
I think it's fairly consistent. The challenge is adoption and trust. So I've read so many horror stories already of developers, as an example. And again, we have a large development team. They use AI and they've been very heavy adopters of AI in terms of checking code, potentially even doing our own releases to production via AI without a human even touching it, which is great. But if you don't know what you're doing or the AI cannot properly integrate with your systems, you leave yourself vulnerable, whether it's security risks, bad code data that brings down another system that you didn't think about, especially based on how complex everything is. The larger companies, my wife has worked at a lot of very large companies, and some of them are still running on the back end on mainframes. I mean, it literally is like black screens with green letters because of that's how the data is done, and it would be horrible to be able to migrate anything like that. But if your company has a data warehouse, then you are in a much better position to utilize AI. So things like warehouse optimization, right? Picking locations, storage locations, optimal paths for your pickers to walk when they're picking multiple orders at the same time, especially now for us, it's Cyber Week at the time. So our order volume is dramatically higher. We need to be as efficient as possible in what we're doing. Things like that. Now, of course, you end up having people resist AI in a lot of ways because the fear is always that AI will replace your job or that AI doesn't understand what you're doing or why you're doing it. And which is the case in some cases. There's processes, there's tools, there's certain things that exist because the complexity is of the system. But eventually the hope is that AI does get to the point where it can take the easier processes, let's say, and maybe even some more complex processes that allows the human element to focus on the more important things that actually does require human processing. And AI can never manage a relationship with a manufacturer, as an example. It can't negotiate a deal, but it can certainly place a purchase order.
Absolutely. So you said a couple of really, really interesting things. And probably the most interesting to me is the fact that even internally with an AI team, uh, you guys still have folks that are hesitant to adopt AI, and it's not
Mhm.
external vendor; it's your own internal team. Um, what are some of the ways that you would advise other supply chain leaders, whether they're working with an external vendor or they have an internal AI team, to um, help kind of bridge the gap with their folks? Is it more to your point of like, hey, these are the low hanging fruit around placing a purchase order, and it's not a job replacement type, initiative? Or what advice would you give other C-suite that are looking to adopt AI?
I think the biggest selling point or the biggest way to get adoption of AI with people who are, reticent in it is you have to develop a level of trust, right? You have to explain to them why the system is going into place and how it'll make their lives better or easier or more efficient. That's the goal with any leader. Every leader is looking to do a couple of different things. They're trying to grow their business, they're trying to optimize their profit margins, and they're trying to be successful. And so if you introduce a tool that is going to help those things happen and you can clearly explain why you're implementing this tool, how it's going to benefit your employees or your suppliers or your customers, and you get that buy-in, that by far is the most important thing. And that level of trust, as an example, when I mentioned AI forecasting, we've had a forecasting system for years, and it's always gone through improvement cycles and everything else. And we have a team of people that places purchase orders. Some of the purchase orders they place are manually placed. They look at the numbers and they take a look at the data that's suggested to them, but they still make their own decisions. There are some that are placed entirely without them even looking, based on a number of factors. If I were just to roll out a brand new AI forecast without telling them why we were doing it, you can imagine what the reaction would be. You have to build that trust. You have to show, hey, here's the old forecast. Here's the new forecast. Take a look. Which one is more similar to what you would do as a human that would make your life easier? And then get that buy-in order to implement something like that. It's not fair to just throw something at people and expect them to just accept it right off the bat. You have to prove to them that it's something that's worthwhile for them.
I totally agree. And I think half of the battle is education, to your
Mhm.
point. And if you can articulate it in the benefit, not only to the business, right? Because that employee might not care about the P&L,
Of course.
necessarily, like you will as a C-suite, but really about what the experience is going to be for them if they can hand off some of that work, and then for the customer. And you look at this, the totality, I think it is a big difference. And then the last thing I'll say is, you talked about customers that are on mainframes. We have those. It is painful. It hit a chord. So, but I want to switch gears a little bit off of the AI and kind of
Cool.
back into, and it's a little bit of a combination of what you were saying with the data subsets and a little bit of now that you have this newer technology. But being in supply chain and logistics, things still go wrong and sometimes the data's off. Can you maybe talk about a time when the forecasting was completely wrong, and what did that teach you about prediction versus adaptation?
It's a great question. So I'll give you a very solid example of this. Uh, Almost all retail grew dramatically over the course of COVID. And the problem with forecasts and the problem with AI is it's going obviously off of historical information and prediction information in the future. Now, AI is, of course, better at it because it can take macroeconomic factors in theory into account. But if you don't have the ability to do that, your forecast is just looking at historical data in order to build a future forecast. So the industry that we work in is cyclical, has its down cycles, has its up cycles. And in fact, it was kind of tuned for a down cycle when COVID hit. And of course, with all the macroeconomic factors that ended up happening, a lot more people bought firearms, as an example. More people were stocking up on different types of items. Everyone thought the world was going to end, right? And so the sales dramatically climbed. Well, how do you forecast when those sales are going to decrease? And how do you adjust what you do from a supply chain standpoint, not knowing when those sales are going to decrease because they can't stay high forever, of course, right? As much as everyone would love every business would love for their revenue to keep climbing at a ridiculous pace, it's just not going to happen. And so what ended up happening in this industry, as an example, is it did come back down to earth. And a lot of people were left holding the bag when it came from a forecasting standpoint. They had overinvested in capital equipment to produce more products from a manufacturing standpoint. Retailers had stocked up way too heavily on certain products. And this isn't just my industry. I remember when Target and Walmart and everybody else was clearing out all of these products that for activities that people did while they were social distancing, and then social distancing wasn't a thing anymore. So that's a great example of where the forecast would have said, hey, you've sold 500 of these in the last 3 days of face masks, let's say, right? And then COVID ends. Well, are you going to keep selling 500 face masks every 3 days? No, of course you're not. So you have to be able to adapt quickly, and you have to know when to trust your feelings in the market and your knowledge of market trends and forces versus what the data is telling you. And so we actually came out pretty well out of that turn because we could see that there was a shift happening from a demand standpoint. And in a way, we had almost turned off a lot of our automation and gone back to manually doing things because you couldn't factor those values into the data in any kind of meaningful way. Now, I'm hoping that's something that AI can, again, handle in the future because there's so many more factors that can be incorporated into an AI forecast or into the logic, just knowing what's happening worldwide or with different companies. But you always have to be able to either roll back or manually redo things in cases of, let's say, extreme circumstances. In a general sense, forecasting something that's a standard thing that happens over and over again, that's pretty simple. And you shouldn't have to do a whole lot there. But it's these
Yeah,
big spikes and waves that you can't predict that throw things off. And that's where you have to be adaptable.
that I think it brings up a very interesting point, and I can only imagine that. And number one, you guys are in a unique position aside from PPE and some of these other things. I think when you look at this craze to stock up on probably a large majority of the things that you sell on the site,
Absolutely.
what time period is it? Is it, from 2020 to 2022 that it was so crazy that you say like, hey, we're just going to kind of put that to the side and maybe you're kind of cherry picking some of the data? Is it a smaller subset, or and then how to your point, like how are you using that or not using that
Mm.
uh, 3 years or 4 years later?
So that's the biggest challenge. And yeah, for COVID, it's 2020 to 2022. But I like to say that, over the last 8 years, let's say, every year there's been some sort of event that has happened, a macroeconomic event that has thrown things for a loop. So I'll give you another example. Again, it's very specific to the industry that we operate in. States have been implementing assault weapons bans, right? No more AR-15s. California just implemented a handgun ban. Literally, it's happening on January 1st. All kinds of things like that. So when a state has a law or something like that that's implemented with a date that it goes into effect, what do you think happens for the month or two before that happens? You have massive spikes in sales. Those sales are going to disappear as soon as that law goes into effect. But you have to remember when you're looking at historical data or any kind of information in the past, hey, what did we have that spike for in March of 2024? Oh, yeah, that's when this ban went into effect. That's why we saw a spike here. And now when you're doing comps and everything else, it throws off all of that information. So, one of the other things, again, e-commerce website, et cetera. Obviously, we're heavy users of Google Analytics and everything else, knowing website traffic. And when we deploy features on the website, when something happens macroeconomic, and you can annotate all of those things and hopefully factor in or factor out, depending on what you're doing, what the effect of those things was and how that's going to affect your future forecasts.
Yeah, it's so interesting, especially with you guys and the SKUs that you have versus a traditional
Of
e-commerce
course.
UG play. It's so much different and frankly more complex, to your point, where you do have all of these spikes. So it's fascinating, and I can spend the whole time talking about that. But I do want to ask you a little bit more about kind of current consumer behavior and some of the trends that you're seeing. I think that I have my assumptions, but I'd love to hear it from you, just as it relates to how are customer expectations around delivery speed, communication, and returns changing, and what does that sit like today?
So for the last, I would say 10 years, it's gotten progressively worse. And to be fair, I feel like we're all guilty of this. This is not my consumer versus somebody else's consumer. All of us as consumers, all of us have a certain expectation and a level and a standard that's been set in our minds. And obviously, a lot of that has been set with Amazon. And every e-commerce retailer will tell you the exact same thing, is that the customer has an Amazon mindset. They expect things to be there in 2 days. They expect that you can return anything for any reason. They expect that the product is going to get there. It's going to be well packaged. It's going to be this, et cetera. And obviously, certain things have changed over time. As an example, if you're an Amazon shopper, you notice how many more things are shipping in poly bags than have ever shipped in poly bags before. Well, I remember a time where every Amazon package was a box.
Sure.
And now everything comes in a poly bag. Why? Because it's significantly less expensive from a material standpoint, from the cost of shipping. Not that Amazon cares about their own cost of shipping, but for everybody else. The cost of shipping standpoint, volume, et cetera, how much you can pack into those Amazon trucks, all those different things. And so, I have expensive products that show up in a poly bag. And I'm okay with it, I guess. It still got there in time, but there's plenty of customers who are not okay with that. So there is a very high expectation of service that customers expect now. And especially with the rollout of brick and mortar stores also doing same day delivery, DoorDash, all of these different things that are now bringing stuff from Dick's Sporting Goods. Here's your Carhartt hat. It's because you didn't want to drive 5 minutes to the store in order to go pick it up, right? So consumers continue to expect better and better service, and the cost of that service keeps going higher, right? UPS, FedEx, USPS, everybody raises rates, especially during the holidays. And every year they raise their rates. And the service gets progressively worse in a lot of ways because there's so many more packages that are weaving their way through that supply chain. And it becomes very challenging.
Do you think, I guess, so first of all, I totally agree. I think the expectation from consumers around the responsiveness of retailers, the shipping speeds, even the quality of the packaging, some of those things, I think it's at an all-time high, and I would assume would continue in that trend. Think that consumers are willing to pay for these premium fulfillment experiences, or do you think that they view it as more of that race to the bottom where it's just an expectation given where you're selling things?
It's a great question. I think the challenge is that a lot of consumers don't realize that they're already paying for those services. So, Amazon Prime is a great example. I hate to keep coming back to Amazon, but they are the standard bearer when it comes to e-commerce, obviously, is owning the majority of the market share for it in the United States and worldwide, probably. When you're paying for Amazon Prime, you are already paying for that higher level of service. You just think of it in your head as a sunk cost. But if you're a company that doesn't have a program like that, let's say a membership program or a speedy delivery program, et cetera, and you have to pay it on every order, mentally, it's a huge difference. So I've seen more and more companies that have started offering, well, let's call it priority order handling as a way, whether it's shipping insurance that doesn't actually do anything. So I don't want to call anybody out, but there are e-commerce companies out there and there are retailers out there who are passing along the costs of that better experience to consumers, whether it's through higher prices or through dubious charges, let's say service charges as they're checking out that you can't get rid of or you aren't able to check out on a specific website. So in the end, does the consumer benefit? Yes. Also, though, does the company probably profit on it? Yeah, probably.
I think that's such an interesting point, because you're right. I was at Amazon shipping, and the rate hikes and some of these things are just inevitable. However, the customer expectations, they just frankly don't care, and they still expect free shipping on the checkout a lot of times, or like something that's, a nominal fee. So it's got to come somewhere. So I think that the majority don't realize they're paying for it, but you have to. All right. So changing gears a little bit here, Alex. When you're working with thousands of brands and suppliers, how do you identify which partnerships are worth investing in versus which ones create more headaches?
It's a great and very challenging one to answer. So a lot of the manufacturers that we work with, one of the reasons that they work with us is it's truly a partnership. And this comes back to the whole part of supply chain of managing relationships with your supplier partners, whether you're a manufacturer working with a factory or you're a retailer working with a supplier. Those relationships, in many cases, define how well your business will do together. Because the whole goal is that you're trying to raise the tide of all the different boats. You're trying to raise your company's tide, and you're trying to raise that brand or that manufacturer's tide. So there are companies where we have a wonderful relationship, but we don't do a lot of sales. But our relationship is just wonderful. And so it doesn't matter that we don't do a lot of sales because we're still benefiting from the friendship that we've developed over the years and all the sort of ancillary benefits of that. Now, there's other companies that we do a lot of business with, and they are a headache to deal with. Bad shipments coming into the warehouse, missing basic data, unable to provide product level information, whatever it is. But the revenue is certainly there. And so everything becomes a revenue, and it's sort of an ROI computation for every company individually. I know manufacturers who stopped doing business with Walmart because it was such a headache doing business with Walmart based on their standards of, let's say, inbound shipments and the amount of chargebacks that those companies received, that they went, this isn't working for us anymore. We understand we're giving up the largest brick and mortar retailer in the United States, but it's costing us more to work with them than we're getting out of this relationship. And so that's really the biggest thing. It becomes an ROI calculation of, is this profitable not only from a business standpoint, but from a personal standpoint, from a human standpoint?
That makes perfect sense. And I'm sure there's not, and maybe there is, but a perfect baked algorithm that you have of like this output of, an ROI calculator. But I would say that you do need to measure the totality because you have, the large customers that are causing, or maybe, from a top line perspective, look great on paper. But when you get into it and you look at maybe even aside from the monetary side, it's causing this backlash and attrition and these other things,
Right.
because becomes a much bigger issue that you have to kind of bake in. So that makes perfect sense. And I guess the second part of that would be, kind of for companies that are managing massive SKU counts, it could be, some of the guys that we're talking about here in specialized categories. What is the biggest mistake that you see them make with their warehouse operations?
Well, I think there's two mistakes I think I see most frequently. The first one is if they don't have their own warehouse, choosing a bad 3PL. And that is probably one of the biggest missteps that any kind of retailer can do, is choose a 3PL partner that does not satisfy the needs or expectations that they have. That's the first thing. And so I encourage people, because we had this issue ourselves back when we had a 3PL for a very short period of time, back 12 years ago, and quickly realized that was not the way to go. That they should do their research on their 3PLs and do very good in-depth research before they decide to go with a specific company versus another one. But if you have your own warehouse and you're managing a significant amount of SKUs, it's the warehouse optimization itself, right? And it's the inefficiency that you see in a warehouse. As an example, when we go to Black Friday, everybody does Black Friday, everybody has doorbusters. If your doorbusters are spread all over your warehouse before Black Friday, you're going to have a really bad weekend. Your warehouse workers are going to have a really bad weekend. They're going to be running around like crazy, right? Your high velocity SKUs in general should all be in a place where they're quickly and easily picked in order to get to those customer orders. So as an example, we provide our warehouse team, hey, here's this list of 100 items that we expect to go bonkers over the course of these 3 days. Put them right up front by the shipping stations so that you don't have to be running all over the warehouse for it. Similar type of things. It's the warehouse itself, in terms of its optimization, is probably one of the things that people don't think about as much, because when you're setting up a warehouse, you're just setting up locations and you're putting products there, et cetera. And again, coming back to the data, if you don't have good data about which items you're selling or not, or you're not reorganizing that warehouse to make sure that it's happening for you to make it as efficient as possible, then you're leaving yourself in a hole. One of my favorite companies that we work with is a distributor in our industry that services a huge amount of brick and mortar stores and online retailers, et cetera. And they have one of the coolest warehouse distribution systems I've ever seen. It's actually a machine that's about Oh, I don't know. It's very large, and it has a lot of bins. This machine, every bin has a different product in it, or a different SKU, I should say. Uh, and the machine is constantly reorganizing the bins based on the velocity of sales of the products to always put the bins that are selling better closer to the front. And for the packers, it actually shoots the bins right to the packers. They just grab it right out of the bin. Don't even have to walk anywhere. It's unbelievable. It's very expensive, but that same idea of what that machine is doing is what warehouses should be doing on a pretty consistent basis, whether it's ranking SKUs as A, B, C, D based on their velocity, whatever it is, by their size, et cetera, to make it as efficient as possible. But again, when you have thousands of SKUs, tens of thousands of SKUs, hundreds of thousands of SKUs in your warehouse, you need to be as efficient as possible in the location mapping of your actual warehouse.
I think that's incredible. I really like the idea of the data sharing.
Mm,
I think to your point, it is much harder with a 3PL because if you're fulfilling for 60 e-commerce companies, as an example, you've got to aggregate their top sellers, and can you actually pull that much inventory forward? I think obviously there's an advantage that you guys have there, but I think the idea of that info sharing, even if you can't invest in something that's automated and pulling
of
bins
course.
forward, you can at least do some of the manual, pull ahead and make the picking that much easier. But I think that's a great tip, and I'm sure people will appreciate it.
Yeah.
Um, but that's all we have time for to cover today. Before we wrap, if people want to follow along with your work and kind of your journey, where's the best place for them to do that?
Absolutely. You can go to opticsplanet.com if you're in the market for anything interesting, camping gear as well, not just shooting, hunting, and outdoor gear, fishing gear, all that fun stuff, astronomy, anything with an optical lens, really. You can find me on LinkedIn, Alex Royzen. Follow me on Instagram if you really want to. It's all up to you guys. But if you have any questions, feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn. I am very responsive to everyone.
Amazing. Well, this has been a extremely fun conversation. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure our viewers will too. Alex, thanks for the time. It was great chatting with you.
Pleasure chatting, Sean.